I remember a heart-to-heart talk Susie and I had during our junior year late afternoon, the kind of hour where the light turns forgiving and everyone feels more honest than they mean to be. We were sitting on the grass outside the arts building, sketchbooks and coffee between us. Tate had just left to grab food, promising, again, to be right back. Susie watched him go, then looked at me with something between curiosity and envy. "You know," she said slowly, "I've never seen anything like your relationship with Tate." I laughed, instinctively defensive. "You mean unhealthy?" Susie shook her head. "No, I mean, intense but consensual. He's so devoted to you, faithful, like really faithful, clingy and loving. He loves you in a way most people don't let themselves love anyone." I didn't answer right away. I picked at the label on my cup. "It's obvious," she added gently, "how he orbits you, how he chooses you every day." Jealousy flickered across her face, not sharp, not bitter, just honest, the kind that admits it wants something it doesn't have. "I used to wish someone would look at me the way he looks at you," she said. I swallowed. Because what she saw as enviable I experienced as complicated, heavy, tender, a love that wrapped itself around my life without ever quite choosing the shape I needed it to be. "Yes," I said finally, "he's a very good man." It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. Susie says it like she's still trying to make the math work. "Tate is the sweetest man I've ever seen," she repeats, slower this time. "He's a total sweetheart to you, Noah, and I've never seen that kind of pinning." She hesitates, then adds, "I honestly can't believe he's just a buddy." I stiffen a little, already knowing where this is going. "When I dropped off your books yesterday," she continues, watching my face, "he was asleep on your bed, fully asleep, like it was the most natural place in the world." She blinks. "Does he do that every day?" I swallow. "Yeah," I say quietly, "pretty much." Her mouth falls open a fraction. "Every day." "He says my bed is more comfortable," I offer, the excuse worn thin from overuse. "And he studies there, and sometimes he just ends up there." Susie exhales, incredulous. "Noah, that's not a sometimes, that's claiming territory." "He doesn't mean it like that," I say automatically, even as my chest tightens. "He just likes being close." She gives me a look, soft, not accusing. "You realize most people would call that emotional intimacy bordering on domestic territory, right?" I laugh too sharply. "He's just Tate." She nods slowly. "That's kind of my point. I don't tell her how he curls toward my pillow when I'm not there, or how he sleeps better when I'm within arm's reach, or how, if I'm gone too long, he gets restless, irritable, untethered." Susie lets out a short laugh, half amused, half stunned. "Noah, that's 17 years. I shrug, like that number doesn't carry weight, like it hasn't shaped the architecture of my entire life. "We grew up together, it just stayed that way." She studies me for a moment, then shakes her head slowly. "You know what that looks like from the outside, right?" I don't answer. "He follows you around," she says gently, ticking it off on her fingers. "He dotes on you, he sleeps in your bed, he rearranges his moods around your presence, and you're telling me this has been going on for 17 years? I try to smile. "He's mellowed out. He used to have emotional outbursts around my friends, especially guys. He doesn't anymore." Her eyebrow lifts. "That's not the defense you think it is." I'd told her bits and pieces over the years, but never the whole story. "I know this is going to sound strange," I said, "but my relationship with Tate isn't really platonic and it isn't romantic either." Susie tilted her head. "What does that even mean?" I laughed. "I've been trying to figure that out for years." She smiled, waiting for me to continue. "Tate's just lonely. He likes having someone around that he trusts. Someone who doesn't get on his nerves. He's never been good with people, but somehow we've always made it work. So whatever we have, it works for us." Susie was quiet for a moment before asking the question I knew was coming. "Have you ever wanted it to become more than friendship?" I slowly shook my head. "When I was younger, I had a crush on him." Susie's eyebrows rose. "Really?" "Yeah." I smiled to myself. It wasn't love or anything that deep, it was just youthful sentiment and a little bit of stupidity. "So what changed?" "I grew up and got over it before I came to Brown. I realized that a straight guy won't see me as more, so moving on was emotionally wise. I realized I didn't actually want a romantic relationship with Tate. What we have now feels right. Susie studied my face. You don't regret never telling him? No, I answered without hesitation. Honestly, I like our relationship exactly the way it is. I know he'll probably never be the easiest person to understand, and I'll probably never completely understand him, but he's the most important person in my life. I don't need to date him to appreciate that. Susie smiled warmly. That's actually kind of sweet. I shrugged. I also think romance is a little overrated. She laughed. Now that's an opinion. It is. But look at my schedule. I'm working toward 2 degrees. Between classes, studying, projects, and everything else, I barely have enough time to sleep. I grinned. I don't exactly have room in my calendar for candlelit dinners. Susie laughed again. So you're married to your education. For the moment, and honestly. I looked out across the campus as students hurried between classes. I'm happy. I have friends I care about and goals I'm excited to chase. I have Tate. He may be stubborn, moody, and impossible sometimes. I smiled. But somehow we've built something that works. It doesn't fit neatly into a category, it never has, and I don't think it needs to. Susie nodded thoughtfully. I guess not every meaningful relationship needs a label. I smiled. I've started to believe that's true too. By the time graduation ceremonies had ended and the celebrations were winding down, the realization finally began to sink in. College was over. Tate's family celebrated in typical fashion after the graduation ceremony, treating everyone to dinner at one of Providence's most upscale restaurants. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, soft piano music drifted through the dining room, and waiters in pressed black suits floated between tables carrying silver trays loaded with expensive entrees. For once, even Tate seemed relaxed. He didn't say much, but he listened while everyone else reminisced about the last 4 years. His mother dabbed away tears every few minutes. His father proudly retold stories from graduation as if he had personally delivered Noah's valedictorian speech. Joey and Tim raised their glass several times, insisting on one toast after another until nearly everyone around the table was laughing. Noah looked around the room and couldn't help smiling. It felt less like a celebration of diplomas and more like a celebration of the people who had made those 4 years unforgettable. Eventually the evening came to an end. Hugs were exchanged. Photographs were taken. Promises were made to keep in touch. Then everyone returned to campus. Although graduation was officially over, there were still a few days before everyone left Brown for good. Dorm rooms had to be cleaned. Boxes needed to be packed. Library books had to be returned. Graduation paperwork still had to be completed. Everywhere Noah looked, students pushed carts piled high with cardboard boxes through the residence halls. Doors stood open as music echoed from dorm rooms that were slowly being emptied. Friends wandered in and out of one another's rooms, borrowing tape, helping carry furniture, or reminiscing over forgotten photographs taped to bulletin boards. The campus felt different. Not sad. Not happy. Just temporary. Everyone understood they were living through the final pages of a chapter that would never be written again. For that reason, nobody wanted to waste the little time they had left together. Someone suggested meeting in the cafeteria one last time. The idea spread quickly. By lunchtime the following day, nearly everyone Noah considered a friend had gathered around their usual collection of tables. It looked almost exactly as it had during freshman year. Except everyone looked older. More confident. More certain of themselves. Jack was already balancing 2 lunch trays while trying to convince everyone he was saving seats. Saving seats, Susie laughed. Jack, there are 50 empty tables. I have a system. You absolutely do not. Anna shook her head as she sat down. I can't believe this is our last lunch here. Don't remind me, Susie replied. I'm trying very hard not to become emotional. Jack pointed dramatically across the room. Then don't look over there. Everyone turned. Several graduating seniors were writing farewell messages on one another's shirts with permanent markers. Within seconds, half the cafeteria wanted a marker. Soon, people were walking from table to table collecting signatures, phone numbers, and little notes that ranged from heartfelt to completely ridiculous. Jack proudly wrote on Noah's sleeve, "Don't forget us when you're rich and famous." Susie laughed. "That's sweet." Jack grinned. "I was going to write thanks for carrying my GPA by association, but I ran out of room." On a sign beneath it, "Keep making art, the world needs it." Noah smiled as he read her message. "Thanks." Across the table, Tate silently ate his lunch. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't interested in signing shirts or participating in the chaos around them. He watched quietly while conversations bounced from one memory to another. "Remember when Jack accidentally set off the chemistry lab alarm? I maintain that the smoke detector was overly sensitive. It caught on fire. A small fire." Everyone laughed. "What about Noah getting lost on the first day? I found my dorm eventually. After asking 5 different professors for directions. I was gathering information. You were wandering." The laughter grew louder. Even Tate's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. Noah caught it immediately. "There it is." Tate looked up. "What?" "You smiled." "I did not." "You absolutely did." "I was acknowledging humor." Jack burst out laughing. "Acknowledging humor, Tate, that's the most Tate sentence you've ever said." Even Tate couldn't argue with that. He lowered his head, hiding another reluctant smile as everyone around the table erupted into laughter. For a little while, graduation, moving away, and saying goodbye didn't seem so overwhelming. They weren't worrying about careers, or apartments, or whether they'd stay in touch. They were simply a group of friends sharing one final lunch together in the cafeteria where so many of their memories had begun. None of them knew exactly what the future would bring. But for one last afternoon, that didn't matter. They were exactly where they wanted to be, with the people who had made Brown feel like home. Andrew sat across from Tate at the small wooden table, notebook open but untouched. Tate was focused entirely on his plate of steak, toast, and potatoes, picking at it with deliberate precision. Andrew watched carefully, noting every tiny movement. Then Tate reached for a small bottle of lemon juice and squeezed a few drops over his food. "Lemon again?" Andrew asked quietly, just above a whisper. Tate looked up, eyebrows slightly raised, a smirk tugging at his lips. "It improves the flavor. You don't like it?" "No, I mean, it's a lot," Andrew said, leaning back slightly. "Most people don't, I don't know, overthink lemon this much." Tate's smirk widened. "Most people aren't me," he said, tilting the bottle over his eggs like a conductor with an orchestra. "I like things precise, controlled." Tate shrugged. "Not tedious, necessary, you'd understand if you paid attention." He took a bite, lips pressing together, then another squeeze of lemon, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "I notice patterns," Andrew said softly, shifting in his chair. "You do this, rituals, routines, it's like testing the world." "Or testing myself," Tate replied smoothly, smirk never leaving his face. "You think you know someone, you observe, you predict, you fail anyway." Andrew leaned forward, curiosity sparking. "So the lemon, is it part of that, a test?" Tate raised an eyebrow, then chuckled softly. "Maybe, maybe not, you're overanalyzing it, or maybe you're seeing exactly what I want you to see. Perspective is everything." Andrew sat back, notebook still untouched. Tate's movements were impossible to read completely. Every gesture, every squeeze of lemon juice carried meaning, but whose meaning? Tate's? The world's? Andrew didn't know, and that, he realized, was exactly why he couldn't stop watching and why Tate was a complex individual. "Pulled me aside before she left the campus," Susie sighed. "You love him." "That lands harder than I expected." "She softens when she sees my face. I'm not saying it's romantic, not exactly, but it's intense, protective, possessive even when he's being good. I look down at my hands. He says I'm his favorite person, that I ground him." Susie exhales. "Yeah, that tracks." We sit in silence for a moment. Outside, students are laughing, moving on, living lives that don't orbit a single gravitational center. "I don't think Tate knows how to be without you," she says finally, "and I don't think you know who you are without him either." I swallow. "I found out who I am without him. I just prefer when he's around. He's special to me." I know, Susie says softly. I'm not telling you to lose him, I'm just saying, be careful. Being the center of someone's world can feel like love, but it can also be a cage, especially when only one of you is bleeding. I don't answer because she's put words to something I've never dared name. And somewhere across campus, I know Tate is probably on my bed right now waiting like he always does. I decentered Tate from my emotional center and instead filled it with myself, my goals, and other friends. Tate has centered me in his life. There's not much I can do about that. I've told him it's not entirely healthy, but he's so lonely and barely attaches to anyone. I honestly don't know why he attached to me almost 20 years ago. Susie tilts her head, voice dropping. You pine after him too, she says. I've noticed how your attention shifts every time he talks or moves or even breathes differently. My stomach flips. No one else knows, she adds quickly. But I do. A pause. That's why you let him sleep with you, hold your hand, hover, act like a devoted buddy who never leaves your side. Heat rushes to my face so fast my ears burn. I look away, staring at the scuffed floor as it might save me. My voice cracks so I stop, swallow, try again. You're the only one here who's noticed. She doesn't look triumphant, she looks kind. That almost hurts more. Finally Noah broke the silence. It's strange, I loved him, I really did. He smiled faintly at the memory. I was in love with him for 10 years. Susie didn't interrupt. I don't regret loving him, Noah continued. Those feelings were real, but it was a childish infatuation. He was my buddy, my family in a lot of ways. Loving him became part of who I was. But he broke your heart, Susie said gently. He did. The words came without anger, they were simply true. I spent so much of my life hoping something would change. I kept thinking maybe one day he'd look at me differently. Noah shook his head with a bittersweet smile. Eventually, I realized I was waiting for something that was never going to happen. Susie reached over and squeezed his hand. So, are you still in love with him? Noah looked out across the campus before answering. No. The answer surprised even him with how certain it sounded. I'm nostalgic sometimes, he admitted. Not because I want him back, but because I remember who I was. I remember believing that love could solve everything if I just waited long enough. I miss that version of myself sometimes. He was naive, but he was hopeful. Susie smiled softly. There's nothing wrong with remembering. No, Noah agreed. The memories don't hurt the way they used to, they just remind me of how much I've grown. He leaned back against the bench. I've moved on, it took a long time, but I finally did. So what's next? Noah laughed quietly. First I finish school, that's my priority. And after that? A small smile spread across his face. After that, he said, I'm going to let myself meet other guys, really meet them. No comparisons, no waiting for Tate to become someone he isn't. Susie grinned. I was wondering when you'd finally say that. I think I owe myself that chance. You absolutely do. I wasn't sure at first, she says, but the way you soften around him, the way you forgive him instantly, that's nothing, Noah. I give a shaky laugh, it's pathetic. It's human, she corrects, and brave, you've been loving someone quietly for a long time. I nod, eyes stinging. My whole life feels arranged around not wanting to lose him. She reaches over and squeezes my hand. And he loves you, she says gently, just not in the way you need. The truth of that sits between us, heavy and familiar. I don't know how to get Tate to stop obsessing about me, I whisper. I know, Susie says, but someday you might have to stop letting his love be the only one that counts. I think of Tate probably on my bed right now, waiting like he always does, and my chest aches with something that has never quite been hope and never quite been despair. Just love, and the cost of carrying it alone. Tate told me, Susie said carefully, that you two used to be closer, that he feels like there's a wall now, like you're holding something back from him. What happened? He betrayed me in the worst way possible, even though he hasn't a clue, I said. The words came out flat, practiced, like I'd rehearsed them in my head 100 times. Susie, I say, picking at a blade of grass, do you know why my 18th birthday was such a breaking point for Tate and me? She shakes her head, you've hinted, but no. I take a breath. I was at the Blue House, everyone thought it was this big, happy night for me. I let out a short laugh. But Tate brought a girl back to the house. To our bed, the one we've shared together for years. Susie goes still, on your birthday. Yeah, I say, my special night. He knew how much it mattered to me, and it wasn't just that he slept with her, it was that it felt intentional. Days later, someone mentioned that he had done it all with her because I had lied about something unimportant. It still hurts. That's brutal, she says quietly. I remember standing there realizing I couldn't even be angry, I say. I was just hollow, something in me shut off. After that night I couldn't be close to him the same way. I tried, but it was never innocent again. Susie looks at me, eyes soft but fierce. Noah, that was hurtful. Even if the straight doofus doesn't have a clue, anyone would have been crushed by that. I kept minimizing it, I admit, telling myself it was just immaturity, but it was my birthday, it was supposed to be safe. Instead, it taught me I didn't matter the way I thought I did. She reaches over and squeezes my hand. I'm really glad you told me. I nod, staring out at the students crossing the lawn, all of us moving forward in time whether we're ready or not. Me too, I say. I think I needed someone to hear it and call it what it was. Tate loves you too, but it's different with him. His love isn't romantic or platonic. I can't figure out his hesitancy for you. He acts like a jealous lover but denies he has those feelings or motives. He likes touching you and being near you, Susie explains. He doesn't have any intention of acting on anything and rarely punishes me for prioritizing other friends, Noah sighed. Susie's smile faded into something softer, more attentive. She leaned back against the table, folding her arms but keeping her body open. How do you mean? I stared at my hands. My fingers were worrying the hem of my sleeve, twisting it until it hurt. He punished me, I said finally, for not orbiting him, for having a life that didn't ask his permission. She didn't interrupt. That made it easier and harder. He slept with someone, a girl, Tina, in our dorm bed, I continued, voice tight. Not because he wanted her, because he wanted to hurt me, because he wanted to remind me I could be replaced or corrected or put back in line. Susie inhaled sharply but stayed quiet. I trusted him, I said, with my space, my body, my heart, and he knew exactly where to aim. I laughed once, bitter. He always does. She was quiet for a long moment, then said gently, and he thinks it was a mistake. Of course he does, I replied, because he got me back, because I forgave him, because I always do. Susie shook her head. That's not a small thing, Noah. I know, my voice cracked. That's why there's a wall now, not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally realized loving him without protecting myself was killing me. She reached over and squeezed my arm. Does he know that? I thought of Tate's hands in my hair, his voice swearing devotion, his terror of sleeping alone, of how sincere he was and how incomplete. No, I said quietly. Tate knows I pulled away. He doesn't know why, and I don't know how to tell him without breaking something that can't be put back together. Susie nodded slowly. Sometimes walls aren't about shutting people out, she said. Sometimes they're about making sure you survive what's on the other side. I swallowed, blinking hard. I just wish he'd notice that loving someone means not hurting them to keep them close. She gave me a sad, knowing look. Maybe one day he will, she said, but I'm glad you noticed. When did you more than like Tate? Susie asked quietly. I sighed, the sound heavy in my chest. I fell in love when we were 8. She didn't laugh, she didn't look surprised. She just nodded like that answer fit something she already knew. What made you love him? I thought about it for a long second, then another. There wasn't one moment, there never is. A lot of things, I said, too many small ones that stacked up before I knew what they were doing to me. I gave a weak smile. He's straight, so straight I sometimes wish I felt something that wasn't love. Anger would have been easier, indifference would have saved me years. Susie watched my face closely. I'm the dumb kid who fell for a straight guy, I added, not unkindly, just tired. The cliché, the cautionary tale. She shook her head immediately. You're not dumb. I shrugged. He chose me, over and over, when we were kids, when we were teens, when we were adults. He slept next to me every night, he needed me, he loved me just, not like I did. My voice softened. And when you're 8, you don't know there are different kinds of love, you just know someone feels like home. Susie was quiet for a beat. So, when did it stop being safe for your heart? I swallowed. When I moved out and realized his love came with rules and petty childish tantrums, that he could hurt me and still expect me to stay, that he could panic at the idea of losing me but never imagine choosing me. That's not on you, she said firmly, that's on him. I know, I said, now I do. Back then I just thought loving someone meant enduring them. I thought that was what devotion looked like. She reached out and squeezed my hand. You loved deeply, she said. That's not a flaw, but you're allowed to want more than being someone's center without being their choice. I nodded, throat tight. I don't regret loving him, I admitted. I regret how long it took me to believe I deserved a love that didn't ask me to disappear inside it. Susie smiled softly. That doesn't make you dumb, she said. That makes you human. When you're not looking, Susie said softly, he looks at you in a way I've never seen anyone look at anyone before. I don't know what it is, regret maybe, or sadness. She tilted her head. Does Tate know you're gay or bi? Have you told him you like guys? I shook my head immediately. No, he doesn't know. The whole mess would anger him, so staying silent is preferable. The words came out quicker than I expected, defensive even. He doesn't know I'm gay, he doesn't know I've dated anyone, and I've never slept with anyone except Mark. Susie blinked. Never. I shrugged, suddenly very aware of my hands. It never felt right or safe or honest. I hesitated, then added, how do you explain to someone that the reason you've never crossed that line is that your heart already crossed it years ago and never came back? She studied me carefully. So he thinks you're just you. Exactly, I said. Just his bed warmer, the same kid who followed him around with a backpack too big for his shoulders, the one he shares food with, studies with, sleeps next to. I swallowed. If he knew the truth, everything would change, and I don't think either of us would survive that cleanly. But that look he gives you, Susie said, that doesn't come from nothing. I know, I whispered, and that's the worst part. Whatever he's feeling, whatever that is, it exists in a place where I'm not allowed to name my feelings. So you carry it alone. I nodded. I've carried it since I was 8. Susie reached for my hand. You're not stupid for that. I know, I said, managing a small smile. But I am careful. Loving him quietly is the only way I get to keep him at all. She squeezed my fingers, and he has no idea. No idea, I said, just that something feels different for 4 years, a wall he can't see through. I exhaled. If he ever knew how much of me is on the other side of that wall, he'd either run or never let go. Susie didn't say anything after that. She didn't need to. I nodded when you said it, even though you couldn't see me. That right there is the lock on the door. If he's homophobic, Susie said carefully, then telling him wouldn't just risk the friendship, it would risk your safety or emotional health. I know, I said, that's why I'll never tell him. The certainty in my voice surprised even me. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I know him. I know the things he says when he's angry or scared or threatened. I know how he talks about guys like Mark, and I can't unhear any of that. I stared at the quad, students crossing it like none of them were carrying a secret that could shatter their world. I couldn't survive watching his face change, watching him realize I'm one of the people he thinks are wrong. Susie was quiet for a long moment. That's a heavy thing to love someone through. It is, I said, because it means loving him as he is, not as I wish he were, and it means protecting myself by staying invisible. So you stay, she said, not accusing, just statting. I stay, I echoed. I let him love me the only way he knows how. I take what he gives, his loyalty, his devotion, his closeness, and I don't ask for the thing he can't give without having part of me. Susie's voice softened. That doesn't make you weak. I know, I said, but it does mean I'm always choosing silence over truth. And that was the cruel irony. I wasn't afraid he'd stop loving me if he knew. I was afraid he'd start loving me less, or worse, loving me while despising what I am. So I keep the secret, I keep the bed, I keep the friendship, and I keep the love quiet, unnamed, and mine alone. I often think about how different things could have been if Tate had learned compassion instead of cruelty for gay people. Life might feel lighter, less guarded, if he treated people with the same openness his mother Talia seemed to carry so naturally. That memory from childhood still lingers about 2 gay boys we met at recess. What Tate did that day stayed with me far longer than the moment itself. 2 boys were just holding hands, quiet, harmless, and he reacted with sudden, shocking aggression. He lashed out, breaking one's fingers and kicking the other a few times in the ribs, leaving them hurt and humiliated in front of everyone. It wasn't only the physical harm that lingered, but the fear it created, the message that kindness or difference could be punished. I remember how the playground went silent, how no one knew what to say or do. That memory shaped how I saw him, and how I understood the cost of hatred long before I had words for it. For the time being, I decided it was best to keep Tate in the dark about my sexual orientation and my preference for male companionship. During college, I hardly dated at all. Unless you count 1 or 2 awkward dates that never led anywhere, I didn't have much of a love life. As college came to an end and we packed the last of our belongings, preparing to leave campus for good, I was still convinced that keeping the truth from Tate about myself was the right decision. The biggest surprise at the graduation came during the awards ceremony. My painting earned the $5,000 grand prize. When my name was announced just before the valedictorian speech, Tate nearly swallowed his tongue in disbelief. For a split second, he looked almost offended that my nude painting of Mark had won. He stared at me in speechless amazement before finally shaking his head with a reluctant smile. Our flight back to Los Angeles was pleasant, giving all of us time to unwind after the whirlwind of graduation festivities. As soon as we landed at LAX and collected our luggage, my phone rang. It was Mark. "Congratulations on the award," he said. "You earned it." "Thanks. I've got something to celebrate. A few gay friends and I are taking a cruise. I'd like you to come with us." The invitation caught me completely off guard. "I've never been on a cruise like that," I said with a smile. "Please come," Mark pleaded. "You'll have a great time." I laughed. "Okay, you've convinced me." "Yes," Mark exclaimed, unable to hide his excitement. "One more thing," he added. "Don't bring Tate. This trip is just for gay men, so no straight guys are coming." I hesitated for a moment before nodding, even though he couldn't see me over the phone. "All right. I'll pick you up tomorrow morning at 7 at the Blue House," Mark said. "Pack only white clothes and your swim gear." "White clothes?" "You'll see," Mark replied with a chuckle. "It's part of the experience." Before I could ask another question, he laughed again. "See you tomorrow. Bye, Noah." The call ended, leaving me staring at my phone with a mixture of curiosity and excitement. I'd never been on a cruise before and I had absolutely no idea what Mark had planned. Tate drove us back to his childhood mansion, the familiar place that held decades of memories between us. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the road pass by as one thought kept circling through my mind. How the hell was I supposed to tell Tate I was leaving with Mark tomorrow? I knew I couldn't keep it from him forever, but I also knew exactly how Tate reacted when he felt left out. For years, our lives had been intertwined in ways neither of us could easily explain. Telling him I had plans with Mark, especially plans that didn't include him, felt like I was stepping into dangerous territory. When we pulled into the driveway, Tate glanced over at me. "Something on your mind?" he asked. I forced a small smile. "No," I said, "nothing." Dinner was a welcome distraction. Talia, Terrence, Tim, and Uncle Joey had all come over to celebrate our return to California after 4 years in Rhode Island. They welcomed us home with laughter, stories, and thoughtful gifts, little reminders that, despite everything that had changed, we still had people waiting for us. For a few hours, I managed to forget what was waiting for me the next morning. But every time I looked across the table at Tate, guilt settled a little heavier in my chest. I needed to tell him. I was leaving with Mark on a gay cruise the following morning. The problem wasn't that Tate would be angry because I was going on vacation. The problem was why I was going. If I told him the truth, he'd insist on coming with me, and the moment he realized it was an all-gay cruise, every secret I'd spent years protecting would come crashing down. Worse, he might refuse to let me go at all, convinced Mark was pulling me into something dangerous. So I said nothing. The secret followed me to bed that night. I barely slept. Every hour, I found myself staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of Tate moving around the room before everything finally became quiet. My suitcase had already been packed in secret and hidden in the back of my closet. All that remained were a few last-minute necessities. At exactly 6:30 the next morning, I slipped carefully out of bed. I froze for a moment listening. Tate's breathing remained slow and steady. Good. Moving as quietly as I could, I got dressed, retrieved my suitcase and tucked my toothbrush, deodorant, and a few other toiletries inside. I wrapped my shoes in a towel so they wouldn't clatter against the hard shell of the suitcase before gently zipping it closed. Every tiny sound felt deafening. I eased open the bedroom door, stepped into the hallway, and quietly made my way through the sleeping house. When I finally reached the front door, I glanced back one last time. Part of me wanted to wake Tate and tell him everything. The other part knew exactly how that conversation would end. With a heavy sigh, I stepped onto the front porch, closed the door as softly as I could behind me, and waited in the cool morning air for Mark's cab to arrive. I stood on the front porch with my suitcase resting beside my feet, the cool morning air brushing against my face. The neighborhood was silent, still wrapped in the calm that came just before sunrise. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, my stomach was tied in knots. Part of me wanted to run back inside, wake Tate, and tell him everything before Mark's cab arrived. I already knew exactly how that conversation would unfold. The moment Tate heard I was leaving on a 6-week vacation with Mark, every alarm bell in his head would start ringing. He wouldn't care that I deserved a vacation or that I wanted to see the world. In his mind, the trip wouldn't be about sightseeing or relaxing. It would be about Mark. Ever since Mark had entered my life, Tate had treated him like a rival. He was convinced Mark was trying to pull me away from him, little by little, until there was nothing left of the friendship we'd built over the past 22 years. From Tate's perspective, this cruise would only confirm his worst fears. He would imagine Mark and me spending every day together without anyone else around. He wouldn't know there were hundreds of other passengers on board, or that there would be activities, excursions, and endless opportunities to meet new people. His imagination would paint a completely different picture, one where Mark had orchestrated the perfect opportunity to get me away from everyone who cared about me. That thought alone would eat Tate alive. Jealousy had always been one of the few emotions he struggled to hide. Whenever Mark's name came up, Tate became guarded, possessive, and unusually quiet. He rarely admitted what he was feeling, but after knowing him for so many years, I could read him better than almost anyone. This trip would feel personal to him. Not because I was leaving California. Because I was leaving him. 6 weeks wasn't just a vacation in Tate's eyes. It was 42 days of waking up without me in the next room. 42 nights of going to a cold bed in a house that suddenly felt much larger and much quieter. Knowing Tate, he'd probably convince himself I'd come home a different person. Or worse, that I wouldn't come home wanting him in my life anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Tate had insisted we weren't a couple or best friends, we weren't romantically involved, we were just buddies. Yet whenever someone else wanted my attention, Tate reacted as though he were losing something that belonged to him. His fear had never really been about Mark. It was about being left behind. I sighed and looked back at the front door. For just a second, I pictured Tate asleep upstairs, completely unaware that I was standing outside with a suitcase, waiting for a cab. A wave of guilt washed over me. Leaving without saying goodbye felt cruel. But waking him felt impossible. If he asked me not to go, if he looked at me with that mixture of hurt and desperation, I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to leave. I loved Tate more than anyone in the world, even if that love had changed over the years. Hurting him was the last thing I wanted to do. But we were 22 years old now. Neither of us could keep living as though we were children who couldn't function without the other. Tate needed to learn that spending time apart wasn't abandonment. He needed to discover that sleeping alone, making his own decisions, and living independently weren't things to fear, they were simply part of growing up. And maybe, just maybe, these 6 weeks would help both of us learn that lesson. Against my better judgment, I walked back upstairs one last time. Tate was still asleep, one arm stretched across the empty half of the bed where I'd been lying only minutes before. Seeing him like that almost broke my resolve. I sat on the edge of the mattress, quietly tore a sheet of paper from my notebook, and began to write. Dear Tate, if you're reading this, it means I've already left. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you goodbye in person. I wanted to, but I knew what would happen. You would have asked me not to go, or you would have wanted to come with me. If you had looked me in the eyes and asked me to stay, I don't think I would have had the strength to say no. I love you too much, but I need to do this. I'm 22 years old and I honestly don't know who I am outside of us. We've spent almost our entire lives together. We've lived under the same roof, gone through school together, and shared nearly every important moment. I don't regret a single one of those memories, but I think it's time I learned who Noah is when he isn't standing beside Tate. Mark offered to take me on a 6-week cruise and I decided to accept. Please don't think I'm leaving because I'm angry with you or because I don't care anymore. Neither of those things is true. I'm not abandoning you, I'm simply taking some time to grow into the man I want to become. I'll send you postcards so you'll know I'm safe and so you can see where I've been. When I get home, I'll bring you a souvenir, something that made me think of you, and hundreds of pictures so we can laugh about my adventures together. While I'm gone, I hope you give yourself the same opportunity I'm giving myself. Take some time to discover who you are. Spend time with your family. Try something new. Sleep in your own bed. Let yourself grow too. No matter where I am, you'll always be one of the most important people in my life. I haven't stopped loving you. I just think it's time I learned to love myself a little more too. Congratulations on graduating. I'll see you in 6 weeks. Love always. Noyexo. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the pillow beside Tate, where I knew he'd see it the moment he woke up. For a few seconds, I simply stood there, memorizing the peaceful expression on his sleeping face before I kissed his cheek one last time before hearing the cab arrive. I quietly picked up my suitcase, slipped out of the room, and closed the door behind me. The moment I stepped aboard the cruise ship, the weight I'd been carrying for weeks began to lift. The gangway disappeared behind me, the lines were cast off, and the ship slowly pulled away from the harbor. As the shoreline grew smaller, so did the constant pressure I'd felt to explain myself to everyone else. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to be someone's son, someone's buddy, or someone's emotional anchor. I could simply be Noah. I didn't call anyone. Not Tate. Not Mark's friends. Not anyone back home. I wanted the silence. The only person who had any idea I might be gone for a while was Talia. The night before, while everyone else had been talking around the dinner table, I'd quietly hinted that I might be leaving for an extended trip. She hadn't looked surprised. Instead, she'd smiled warmly, walked over while she was in the kitchen getting dessert, kissed me on the forehead, and whispered, "Whatever you decide, just be safe." That was all. She hadn't questioned me, hadn't asked where I was going, and hadn't tried to change my mind. She understood that I was 22 years old now. My life belonged to me and my decisions were mine to make. Whether I stayed home or traveled halfway around the world was no longer something that required anyone's permission. That quiet vote of confidence stayed with me. Terrence had been his usual self during dinner. He'd spent most of the evening comfortably settled in his chair, occasionally glancing up from the business section of the newspaper before returning to an article in Forbes. The conversations, the laughter, and the celebration had all continued around him while he remained happily absorbed in the latest stories about companies, investments, and entrepreneurs. It almost made me smile. Everyone had been occupied with their own little world. Mine just happened to be floating away from the California coast. As the ship's horn echoed across the water, I rested my hands on the railing and watched the coastline slowly disappear into the morning haze. For the next 6 weeks, my life would belong to no one else but me. I left my phone buried deep inside my suitcase. I'd already decided I was only going to check it once a week. Before I left, Talia had quietly reassured me that if something truly serious happened, a medical emergency or anything life-threatening, she would get in touch with Mark immediately. Since Mark always kept his phone nearby, I knew I could be reached if it genuinely mattered. That gave me peace of mind. Everything else could wait. For 6 weeks, I wanted to experience life without constantly looking over my shoulder or feeling obligated to answer every call or voicemail the moment it arrived. I already knew what Tate's morning was going to look like. He'd wake up, see my note on the pillow, and realize I was gone. His first reaction would probably be disbelief. Then panic. Then frustration. By the end of the first day, I'd probably have dozens of missed calls and voicemails waiting for me. By the end of the first week, I wouldn't have been surprised if he'd tried calling me hundreds of times. That was just Tate. Whenever someone he loved disappeared from his routine, his imagination filled in the blanks with the worst possible scenarios. I wasn't angry with him for that. But I also couldn't let his fears dictate my life anymore. I'd spent years organizing my world around making sure Tate felt secure. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that I was allowed to have adventures of my own. This trip wasn't about running away from him. It was about running toward myself. I smiled to myself as the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. For the next 6 weeks, I wasn't going to be the quiet, cautious Noah everyone expected. I was going to reinvent myself. I'd introduce myself as Brian. Brian was confident, charismatic, outgoing, someone who wasn't afraid to strike up conversations with strangers or walk into a room without second-guessing himself. Whether that confidence lasted or not didn't matter. For 6 weeks, I wanted to find out what it felt like to step outside the version of myself I'd always been. Maybe Brian wasn't a different person after all. Maybe he was simply the part of Noah that had been waiting for permission to come out into the open. And if Tate couldn't handle me spending 6 weeks discovering who I was after we'd spent nearly our entire lives side by side, then that was something he would have to work through himself. I loved him. I always would. But loving someone didn't mean putting your own life on hold forever. For the next 6 weeks, I was choosing myself. The first 4 weeks of the White Party Gay Cruise were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Every evening, the upper decks came alive. Music echoed across the ship, white lights shimmered against the ocean, and hundreds of people dressed in white gathered to celebrate beneath the stars. There was laughter, dancing, and an unmistakable feeling of joy that seemed to wash away every worry I'd carried aboard. It felt like paradise. Not because everything was perfect, but because no one seemed afraid to be themselves. I met people from every corner of the world. Some were loud and charismatic, others quiet and thoughtful, but they all shared something I'd rarely seen before, a sense of comfort in their own skin. No one seemed to be hiding who they were or apologizing for it. That freedom was contagious. Every day brought another conversation, another friendship, another chance to see life from a different perspective. I spent my afternoons by the pool, my evenings dancing until my feet were sore, and my nights lying on the deck watching the stars drift across the sky. The music never seemed to stop. Neither did the laughter. For the first time in years, I wasn't measuring my life by someone else's expectations. I wasn't worrying about what people back home thought of me or wondering whether I was enough. I was simply living. The cruise gave me something I'd never realized I needed. The confidence to believe there was a place in the world where I didn't have to pretend to be anyone other than myself. For 4 unforgettable weeks, the ocean felt less like water separating me from home and more like a bridge leading me toward the person I was becoming. Noah woke up to the soft sway of the ship and the faint sound of waves. Mark rolled closer, grinning. "Morning, Noah. You ready for another day of pure freedom?" After they cleaned up, Noah headed straight for the buffet. He piled his plate high with shrimp, pasta, and desserts. Mark laughed beside him. "You're going to clear that whole table by yourself again, aren't you?" Noah just grinned and kept eating. The white parties started every night after sunset. Strobe lights pulsed across the deck while hundreds of shirtless men danced, bodies grinding together. Noah lost himself in the crowd, hands sliding over sweaty chests, lips meeting strangers in deep kisses. Scene retracted, see extended version on Wattpad. Whenever Noah asked about LA or any emergencies, Mark shook his head. Same old Noah, nothing important." They never mentioned Tate or the calls. Instead, they danced, ate, fucked, and relaxed under the sun. Noah tried not to think about home. He focused on the parties, the endless food, the open acceptance, and the raw pleasure of being surrounded by men who wanted him openly. The cruise felt like pure freedom, no hiding, no shame, just bodies, moans, and constant release. On June 27, I finally pulled my phone out of the bottom of my suitcase. For the past 4 weeks, I'd kept my promise to myself. I checked it only once a week, ignoring the endless stream of missed calls and unread messages that accumulated while I enjoyed the freedom of the cruise. As expected, most of them were from Tate. There were dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and text messages. I smiled sadly, imagining him wearing a path through the house with his phone glued to his ear. Then one number caught my attention. Unknown caller. Los Angeles area code. My stomach tightened. It wasn't like the others. I hesitated before pressing the voicemail icon. The message began with a calm, professional voice. "Hello, Noah Lunis. This is the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. We're trying to reach you regarding your mother. Please contact us as soon as possible." This is an urgent matter. My heart began to pound. With trembling fingers, I immediately called the number back. The phone rang twice before someone answered. Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. My name is Noah Lunas. I just received a voicemail from your office. There was a brief pause. Mr. Lunas, thank you for returning our call. Before we continue, could you verify your date of birth? I answered automatically, barely hearing my own voice. Another pause. Then the words that shattered my world. I'm very sorry to inform you that your mother was struck by a vehicle 3 days ago. Despite emergency responders' efforts, she died at the scene. Everything inside me went numb. No. The word escaped as little more than a whisper. There must be some mistake. I'm very sorry, the woman replied gently. There was no mistake. I couldn't breathe. The room suddenly felt impossibly small. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. When is the funeral? I somehow managed to ask. It has been scheduled for tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word echoed through my mind. Tomorrow. I wasn't home. I hadn't answered my phone. I hadn't even known. The call ended, but I couldn't remember hanging up. My phone slipped from my hand and landed on the mattress beside me. Slowly, I lowered myself onto the bunk, staring blankly at the floor of my cabin. The gentle rocking of the ship continued as though nothing had happened. Outside, people laughed somewhere on the deck. Music drifted faintly through the hallway. The cruise carried on. My world had stopped. I buried my face in my hands. I wasn't there, I whispered to the empty cabin. The realization struck harder than anything else. My mother had died 3 days earlier. And I hadn't known. I hadn't been there to say goodbye. I don't know how long I sat there on my bunk. 5 minutes. 10. Maybe 20. Time had stopped making sense. I remained on the edge of my bunk, my phone lying beside me, the words from the coroner's office replaying over and over in my mind. Your mother was struck by a vehicle. She died at the scene. The funeral is tomorrow. No. I whispered the word again, hoping that somehow repeating it would make everything disappear. It didn't. A sob escaped my chest before I could stop it. Then another. Within seconds, I was crying so hard I could barely catch my breath. My shoulders shook uncontrollably as every emotion I'd been holding back crashed over me at once. I'd missed the phone calls. I'd missed the chance to say goodbye. I'd been laughing, dancing, and watching sunsets while my family was planning my mother's funeral. The guilt was unbearable. A gentle knock sounded at my cabin door. I didn't answer. A moment later, the door eased open. Noah. It was Mark. He stepped inside, smiling at first, but the expression disappeared the instant he saw me. I was hunched over on the bunk, my face buried in my hands, tears soaking my shirt. Noah. His voice immediately filled with concern. He hurried across the cabin and knelt in front of me. What happened? I couldn't answer. The words refused to come. Mark's face paled. His eyes widened. Oh my God. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. Is it Tate? I shook my head violently. No. The single word dissolved into another wave of sobs. Mark rested a hand gently on my shoulder. Talk to me. I forced myself to inhale. I choked out, my mom. The words caught in my throat. I just found out. I could barely continue. She was hit by a car. I broke down again. They said she died 3 days ago. For a moment, Mark didn't say anything. His eyes closed as the news settled in. Then he climbed onto the bunk beside me without another word. He wrapped both arms around me and gently pulled me against his chest. I didn't resist. I couldn't. He began rocking me slowly back and forth, the way someone comforts a frightened child. It's okay, he whispered softly. I'm here. I buried my face against his shoulder and cried harder than I ever had in my life. I wasn't there, I kept repeating. I wasn't there. You didn't know, Mark said quietly. You couldn't have known. I should have answered my phone. You didn't know. I left. You didn't know. His voice never rose. He simply stayed with me, repeating those words while I cried until there were no tears left. When I had finally calmed enough to breathe, Mark stood. "We're getting off this ship." I looked up at him through swollen eyes. "Now." Fortunately, the ship was already approaching its next scheduled port. Within an hour it was docked. Mark handled almost everything. He spoke with the cruise staff, arranged for us to disembark early, and found the fastest route to the nearest airport while I stumbled through each step in a daze. The funeral had originally been scheduled for the following morning. After speaking with my family, arrangements were made to delay the service until the afternoon, giving us just enough time to make it home. Even then it would be close. The trip back to Los Angeles would take nearly 16 exhausting hours between flights, airport transfers, and waiting for connections. Neither of us complained. Every minute mattered now. My flight from Greece to California stretched endlessly, giving me time to think about how I would face Tate and Talia, how I would explain my absence, my silence, and the life I had been living in the meantime. Every mile closer felt heavier, each passing cloud a reminder that I couldn't escape the consequences of leaving them behind. As our plane lifted off, I stared silently out the window. 4 weeks earlier, I'd watched California disappear beneath the horizon with excitement about discovering who I was. Now I watched the clouds drift past, wishing with every fiber of my being that I could turn back time. I would have traded every party, every sunset, and every moment of freedom for one last chance to tell my mother that I loved her. I was numb. I couldn't feel anything. Grief, fear, or even crying didn't happen. My body moved through motions that felt unreal, detached from the storm inside. The taxi pulled up and left me at the curb of the Blue Estate. One suitcase in hand, Mark beside me, I stared at the familiar facade, trying not to imagine the worst that was yet to come. Every step toward the door felt like walking through molasses, each one heavier than the last. Mark glanced at me, his usual bravado muted by the heaviness in the air. He offered a small, uncertain smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I wanted to steel myself to hold on to some fragment of composure, but the emptiness in me whispered that no preparation could soften the impact of reality. Together, we paused at the threshold, knowing that once we stepped inside, nothing would ever feel the same. It didn't help because I wasn't close to my mom. We hadn't been for my entire childhood. I couldn't call her for advice, I couldn't laugh with her, I couldn't feel the warmth people talk about when someone dies. I barely knew the sound of her voice anymore, and now I never would. Part of me feels nothing. Relief maybe, freedom, but underneath there's this hollow. I didn't hate her, I just didn't connect, and the guilt is worse than the grief. Because even though we were distant, she was still gone, and I can't go back and fix it, can't make our conversations mean more than they ever did. Instant, that word keeps coming up. They say the accident was instant, like it should ease the pain. But it doesn't. It just underlines that all the time I didn't spend, all the words I never said are gone, and I'm left with a hollow that isn't just about losing her, it's about losing the chance to have loved her. We talked once during the 4 years at Brown. That part hurt in a quiet, sour way, like a bruise you only feel when you press on it. There were so many things I never said. So many things I stopped waiting for her to say first. Grief doesn't care how complicated the relationship was, it just shows up and takes everything away. My mom had been a chronic alcoholic since I was 2 years old, and as far as I knew, she had made no changes in her lifestyle since I left California. I left a voicemail for Talia, alerting the family that we were in their driveway. My voice was flat, distant, almost mechanical, as if saying the words out loud might fracture the fragile calm I was clinging to. Hanging up, I gripped my suitcase tighter, my knuckles turning white. The estate loomed ahead, familiar yet impossibly alien. Every step toward the door felt heavier, each one dragging me closer to the storm I knew was waiting inside. From the backyard came the sound of loud, sharp, deliberate gunshots. My chest froze, my pulse skipping erratically, but I didn't see him, I didn't see Tate. Still, I knew instantly who it was who fired those shots. Every instinct in my body screamed the same thing: Tate must know I'd arrived. The certainty was a weight pressing down on me, coiling tight and cold in my stomach. For the 18 years I had known Tate, he had always affected me in ways I could never completely explain. The moment he walked into a room, my pulse quickened. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs so hard I was convinced everyone around me could hear it. Heat rushed into my face, leaving my cheeks flushed pink. My palms became damp, my mouth went dry, and every sentence I had planned in my head vanished. I'd stumble over my words. I'd babble. Sometimes I'd forget what I was trying to say altogether. It was ridiculous. I knew it was. But no matter how many times it happened, I couldn't stop it. Tate had that effect on me. Just being close to him was enough to turn me into a nervous wreck. Except this time they were tangled with something else. Fear. I had no idea what awaited me in Los Angeles. Talia had undoubtedly told Tate why I had come home so suddenly. He knew about my mother's accident by now. But he also knew I'd disappeared for 4 weeks without so much as a phone call. I imagined him sitting at home, furious with me. He'd probably replayed my note 100 times in his head. He'd probably convinced himself I'd chosen Mark over him. He'd probably spent every night angry, hurt, confused, or all three. I let out a long sigh and rubbed my forehead. Why had I told him I was going? The question didn't make any sense. Of course I'd had to tell him. Leaving without any explanation would have hurt him even more. Still, a part of me dreaded seeing him again. Not because I thought he'd yell. Because I knew one look at his face would be enough to unravel every ounce of resolve I'd built over the past month. No matter how independent I wanted to become. No matter how much I'd grown during those weeks away. Tate still had a way of making my heart forget everything my mind had already figured out. Mark shifted beside me, eyes darting toward the yard, his usual confidence muted, replaced by tense uncertainty. He offered a small, unsure smile as if trying to anchor me, but it barely reached either of us. The gunshots had shattered the illusion of control, and now even the familiar presence of Mark couldn't calm the storm inside. I stepped forward, the suitcase heavy in my hand, and made my way to the front door. The world felt oddly quiet now, the echo of gunfire fading into something more ominous, an expectation, a warning, or a demand for confrontation I wasn't ready for. Each footfall toward the entrance felt like moving through molasses, a slow, inevitable march toward reality. Inside, the house was still, the rooms dimly lit and hushed, holding their breath. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, a reminder of all the years I had spent here and all the things I had tried to escape. I didn't see Tate as I crossed the threshold, didn't hear the shuffle of his presence or the tension in his movements, yet I could feel him. Every part of me knew he was here somewhere, waiting, aware. My chest tightened and I swallowed hard, trying to steel myself for the confrontation I knew was coming, even if I couldn't yet see him. Mark stayed a step behind, his hand brushing briefly against mine in a gesture of solidarity. I wanted to lean on him, to let him carry some of this weight, but even that felt insufficient. The house around us was a cage of memory and expectation, holding us in place until the reckoning arrived. I moved deeper inside, suitcase in hand, forcing myself past the foyer, past the familiar rooms, toward the center of the house where the reality of what I had left behind and what I had ignored would finally meet me. The house felt impossibly still, almost holding its breath as I dragged my suitcase across the polished floor. Every step echoed faintly, a reminder that I was no longer on the carefree cruise, no longer Brian, the anonymous man untethered from the past. I kept my head down, tried to breathe normally, but the tight coil of dread in my stomach refused to loosen. I felt like Bugs Bunny in one of those old cartoons, the ones where his heart pounded so hard it practically burst through his chest and beat like a bass drum. That was exactly how I felt. Every beat echoed in my ears. My chest felt impossibly tight, as though my heart were trying to force its way out. My breathing became shallow, my palms damp. And my legs suddenly felt unsteady beneath me. With every step I took toward Talia's living room, the feeling only grew stronger. I knew Tate was in there. I hadn't seen him in 4 weeks. For 18 years he'd had this strange, unexplainable effect on me. Just knowing he was nearby was enough to send my pulse racing. My face would grow warm, my thoughts would scatter, and every clever thing I'd planned to say would disappear. My tongue would seem to forget how to form words, leaving me stammering like an embarrassed fool. It never mattered how much I tried to prepare myself. It always happened. Every single time. Part of me wondered if this was simply what happened when you loved someone so deeply for so long. Even after everything that had changed, my body still recognized Tate before my mind had a chance to catch up. I stopped outside the living room doorway and took one slow breath. My heart was still pounding like Bugs Bunny's cartoon drum. Then I stepped inside. Mark stayed close behind, his eyes scanning every shadow, every doorway, every muted corner of the blue estate. I could feel his tension like a second heartbeat, syncing with my own. Neither of us spoke, there was no need. Words here felt useless, fragile against the weight of what had just happened and what was waiting somewhere beyond our sight. I passed the familiar furniture, the blue family photographs lining the walls, reminders of birthdays, graduations, and holidays I hadn't been a part of in weeks. Each one pressed against my chest like a weight, a reminder that life had continued without me, that Tate and Talia had moved on during my absence, lived in a rhythm I wasn't part of. And yet, even as I tried to focus on the practical, setting down my suitcase, breathing through the tension, I could feel Tate everywhere. Not in sight, but in the faint creak of a floorboard, in the subtle shift of a shadow, in the air thick with anticipation. I tried to steady myself as I reached the main hallway, the center of the house where everything converged. This was where I would see him, where the confrontation or the storm would finally take shape. But Tate was still unseen, still waiting. I felt his awareness in every corner, every subtle vibration of the house, as though he had somehow marked the space, claimed it while I had been gone. Mark cleared his throat quietly behind me. "You okay?" he whispered, barely audible. I nodded, though the truth was far from it. I didn't feel okay, couldn't feel okay. The numbness had returned, a hollow shell of a body moving through a world I couldn't fully grasp. And yet, I knew it wouldn't last. Tate's presence, even invisible, was a pressure that demanded reckoning. We moved deeper inside, past the living room and into the hallways leading to the back of the house. Every step was measured, careful, because I didn't know when or where Tate would appear. The air seemed heavier, charged, waiting for the moment of recognition, the confrontation, the first words that would cut through weeks of distance, silence, and pretense. And still, he didn't appear. But I felt him. I knew he was here, somewhere close enough to see us, to sense us, to mark our intrusion into the world he controlled. My hands gripped the suitcase tighter, Mark, a silent anchor beside me, and I realized that nothing, neither time nor distance, nor the life I had tried to build, would shield me from the storm that was Tate. Talia made her entrance, bursting through the parlor door with a whirlwind of energy. She rushed toward us, throwing her arms around Mark and me in quick, tight hugs. "Welcome back, dears. I can't believe you're actually..." "Greg." Another sharp gunshot cut through her words like a whip, and she jumped back, her arms still half around us, eyes wide. Mark smirked beside me, clearly entertained by the chaos, while I felt the tension coil tighter in my chest. Undeterred, Talia straightened, cheeks flushed, and tried again. "I've been baking cookies all morning, and I made..." Bang! Another crack of a gunshot interrupted her mid-sentence. She flinched, spinning the tray of treats in her hands as if the sound itself were mocking her efforts. "I mean, I even brewed fresh coffee, Mark. It's your favorite roast. I remember from when Noah told me last year, and I thought maybe we could sit down, have a snack, and just talk about everything that's happened while you've been..." Bang! Another shot, louder this time, silenced her completely. She let out a long, frustrated sigh, exhaling like she was trying to release the mounting tension. "I just wanted a proper welcome, cookies, coffee, a little chit-chat, maybe hear about..." Bang, bang, bang. She jerked the tray in her hands, clutching it as if the gunfire might shatter the cups and plates. "How are you both? Tell me about your month-long cruise, how you two have been." Bang. "Oh my God, my nerves can't." Bang, bang. "This is ridiculous." Her voice climbed higher, a mix of indignation and disbelief. Finally, red-faced and exasperated, Talia stomped toward a living room window, yanking it open. She leaned out, gesturing wildly toward the backyard. "Totem Joseph Cornelius Blue, stop shooting at Mark's photograph and give it a rest. You're waking the dead now, get your ass inside, to be polite." Her voice carried, sharp and commanding, cutting through the tension. She paused, hand on her hip, glaring into the yard, refusing to back down even as another gunshot cracked behind her. Mark chuckled quietly beside me, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and absurd relief. The chaos had begun, and there was no going back now. Mark laughed, the sound low and amused, shaking his head. "Maybe I should go before I'm shot and served for dinner by the young master," he said, glancing toward the backyard with an exaggerated grimace. His smirk widened as he imagined Tate lurking behind some shadow, ready to enforce his reign of chaos. Talia laughed, a short, melodic sound that barely cut through the tension. "Uncle Joey and Tim have been here all week trying to..." Bang! A gunshot shattered her words mid-sentence. She jumped, eyes wide, clutching her coffee cup as if it might protect her. She let out a nervous giggle, trying to regain her composure. They were trying to make sense of the estate, organize things, get some semblance of Bang! Another crack from the backyard silenced her again. She froze for a heartbeat, glancing wildly between Mark, me, and the door to the garden as if waiting for the next shot to announce its presence. She shook her head and sighed, exhaling like she was trying to release all the frustration, fear, and absurdity at once. Tate has been a royal terror, she said, her voice rising over the faint echo of another distant gunshot. You've noticed all the knickknacks and breakables are gone, right? He's smashed the front rooms, put a dozen holes in the walls, and… Bang! Another gunshot cracked across the yard, cutting her off mid-sentence. She flinched but pushed forward, determined not to be silenced. I mean, honestly, Bang bang. Two more rounds rang out in quick succession, each one punctuating her words with violent precision. Talia's hands fluttered helplessly in the air, gesturing wildly as if the gestures themselves could explain the madness. He's utterly impossible, I swear it's like living with a hurricane, and now with you back, oh my God, this is going to be. Bang bang bang. She froze again, voice trailing off into a high-pitched squeak, looking as if she were negotiating with the backyard rather than addressing us. Her eyes rolled skyward as she gave a resigned sigh. You know, Tate has been a royal terror, and honestly I don't know how anyone survives in this house. The walls are perforated, the furniture is… Bang! Another crack cut through, sharper and closer this time, and she flinched violently, grabbing at the edge of the window frame. Mark leaned back slightly, stifling a laugh, shaking his head as he watched her flail. Maybe I should really go, he murmured under his breath, smirking at the absurdity of being inside the blue estate while the air terrorized the backyard. Talia groaned, running a hand through her hair, leaning out the window to glare at the shadows. Honestly, this is completely unacceptable, the mess, the chaos, the… Bang! Another gunshot and she flinched again, yanking the window shut with a loud snap. You think living here is easy, you think anyone survives this, the entire front of the house is. Bang bang. She clapped a hand over her mouth mid-word. She exhaled sharply and muttered under her breath, royal terror indeed. Her eyes met ours briefly, a combination of exasperation, amusement, and warning. Even as the gunshots rang out like punctuation marks in the air, she tried to keep her composure. Trying to explain Tate's reign of chaos without losing herself entirely to the sound of destruction. Every sentence she began seemed doomed to be interrupted, yet she pressed on, determined that we understand just what kind of storm we had walked into. Talia sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the entire blue estate. Noah dear, I'm sorry to inform you that Tate burnt everything you have in this house. He built a bonfire and torched everything. Her voice trembled slightly, part exasperation, part disbelief. I stood frozen, my mouth gaping, staring at her as if the words themselves might be some cruel trick. The thought of everything, memories, possessions, mementos, reduced to flames was almost too much to process. Talia shook her head, running a hand through her hair. He's smashed 15 windows in this house, and ever since graduation he's been shooting at Coke bottles in the backyard, just non-stop, every single day. He's treated this place like his personal firing range. And now, well, now he decided to upgrade to bonfires. I could feel the numbness returning, the hollow emptiness settling in as my mind tried and failed to piece together the magnitude of what she was saying. Mark shifted beside me, his usual smirk replaced with a faint edge of worry, glancing toward the backyard as if expecting to see the flames lick the sky at any moment. Talia gently caressed my hand, her touch grounding and soft against the numbness that had taken over my body. Noah, your memories and family documents, she said carefully, her voice lowering as if trying to cushion the blow. Photographs, records, and anything truly important survived because those things were stored safely in my safe in the basement. But your clothes, your possessions, your toys, your textbooks, she hesitated, her expression tightening. They were all burnt. Bang! The gunshot cracked through the house, rattling the windows. I flinched instinctively, my fingers tightening around hers. Talia exhaled slowly, trying to maintain her composure. Tate has gone through $25,000 worth of bullets this month alone, she continued, her tone shifting between disbelief and exhaustion. Boxes and boxes of ammunition, like he's trying to empty something out of himself that just won't. Bang, bang. She paused again, eyes closing briefly as the echo lingered. Won't settle, she finished, quieter now. Mark let out a short laugh beside me, shaking his head. That's one way to cope, he muttered, half amused, half incredulous, glancing toward the backyard like he was watching some unhinged performance. Talia shot him a look, though it lacked any real bite. Poor Joey tried to take Tate's gun yesterday, she went on, her voice rising slightly as if the absurdity demanded it. He thought he could reason with him, be the adult in the situation and just remove the weapon. Bang! She jumped, her hand tightening around mine. But he nearly got himself shot in the groin, she finished sharply, clearly still rattled by the memory. Joey left at midnight so Tate wouldn't shoot him again. Another gunshot rang out, louder this time, closer. Bang! Talia sighed, long and dramatic, her shoulders sagging as she looked between Mark and me. Honestly, I don't know how any of us are still alive, she muttered, shaking her head. This entire summer has been one long catastrophe. The echoes of gunfire lingered in the air, filling the silence that followed. I stood there, absorbing it all, the destruction, the chaos, the pieces of my life reduced to ash, while outside, Tate kept firing, each shot a reminder that whatever waited for me here wasn't over, not even close. Talia stormed to the window again, throwing it open with sharp urgency. Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue, lunchtime now, she shouted into the yard, her voice carrying with practiced authority. Wash up and leave the gun outside. Her tone left no room for argument. It was the kind of command built from weeks of exhaustion and barely contained chaos. I sat stiffly in my seat, hands resting on my knees, bracing myself. My heart pounded despite the numbness, a dull, heavy rhythm in my chest. I waited for the inevitable, for the dramatic entrance, the storming presence, the confrontation I had been dreading since I stepped onto the driveway. I pictured him kicking the door open, gun still in hand, eyes locked on me. The drama, the explosion, the reckoning. But I stood corrected. Instead, the house answered in a different way. A deafening slam echoed from upstairs, Tate's bedroom door, unmistakable. It was the hardest I'd ever heard him slam it, the sound cracking through the house like a final gunshot, rattling the walls, vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. The echo lingered, heavy and final, replacing the chaos outside with something far more controlled and far more dangerous. The silence that followed was worse. I hope you're hungry, Talia said brightly, placing the roast at the center of the table. I may have gone overboard by cooking a roasted turkey, but honestly, after this week, I needed something extravagant. Mark smiled, leaning back slightly, amused at Tate's behavior while savoring the good food on the table. It smells incredible. I think we both needed normal. I nodded, cutting into the roast. Yeah, it's good. Good, Talia gasped lightly, hand to her chest. Only good, I slaved over that for hours, Noah. Mark chuckled, he means it's great, he's just processing. Processing, Talia repeated, softening. Of course, well, you take your time, there's plenty. A brief silence settled as we ate. Excuse me for just a moment, Talia said, pushing her chair back from the dining room table. She walked into the foyer, stopped at the foot of the grand staircase and looked toward the second floor. Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue, she shouted. Her voice echoed throughout the mansion. Get your skinny ass down here this instant, you're being incredibly rude. She waited. Nothing. Noah is here with his friend Mark, she continued. I order you to come downstairs, say hello, and eat the lunch that the chef and I worked so hard to prepare. Still no response. Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue, she yelled again, her patience gone. Get your rebellious ass down here immediately. Silence. Not a footstep. Not a door opening. Nothing. Tate remained in his bedroom, refusing to acknowledge anyone downstairs. Talia stood there for another moment before letting out a defeated sigh. She turned and walked back into the dining room, her expression equal parts embarrassment and frustration. I'm sorry, she said as she resumed her seat. My son is being unbelievably rude and tedious today. She offered Noah an apologetic smile before turning her attention to Mark. And Mark? Yes, ma'am, Mark replied. I wouldn't recommend going into the backyard. Mark looked puzzled. Why not? Talia took a sip of her water before answering with a weary smile. Unless you want to stand next to the target practice board. Mark frowned. The target practice board. She nodded. For the past month, Tate has been pinning up a photograph of you and using it for target practice. An awkward silence settled over the table. Mark slowly set down his fork. I guess he's still angry with me. I'm afraid that's an understatement, Talia replied. He's convinced you stole Noah away from him and he hasn't let go of that belief. Noah lowered his eyes to his plate, guilt settling heavily in his chest. He had expected Tate to be upset. He just hadn't realized how deeply the past month had wounded him. So, Talia continued, carefully casual, tell me about the cruise, Greece, right, Athens. Mark jumped in easily. Yeah, Athens, Mykonos, a few stops along the way, beautiful this time of year. Sounds dreamy, Talia said, sun, sea, and no responsibilities. I swallowed, staring at my plate. Yeah, something like that. Another pause, silverware clinked against plates. Well, Talia said, clearing her throat slightly, I've sorted out sleeping arrangements for tonight. Mark looked up. Oh. Noah, you'll be in the spare room, she said, glancing at me with a gentle smile. It's just down the hall, fresh sheets, everything's ready. I nodded, okay. And Mark, she added, turning to him, you'll be right next door in Joey's old room. That works perfectly, Mark said, thank you really. It made the most sense, Talia continued lightly, close but everyone still has their own space. Mark smirked faintly, probably wise. Talia gave a small, knowing smile but didn't elaborate. I took another bite of bread pudding, forcing myself to focus on the sweetness. This is really good. There we go, Talia said, pointing at me. That's the reaction I was waiting for. Mark laughed softly. He's coming back to life. Barely, I muttered. Talia reached for her glass. Well, you're here now, that's what matters. Another silence followed, not awkward but full, heavy. No one said his name, but the quiet upstairs, the echo of that slammed door, Tate's spirit lingered over the table like a fourth guest no one dared acknowledge. Talia waited until after the meal before saying anything. As everyone began clearing the table, she quietly disappeared down the hallway. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a carefully wrapped package no larger than a hardcover book. She stopped beside me and gently placed it in my hands. I know nothing can make this better, she said softly, but I was hoping this might bring you a little comfort before we leave for the funeral this afternoon. I looked up at her confused. What is it? Open it. I slowly peeled back the wrapping paper. Inside was a beautifully bound photo album. My throat tightened before I had even opened it. When I lifted the cover, my breath caught. Page after page contained carefully arranged collages of the few photographs I had of my mother. Some were from when I was a little boy sitting on her lap. Others showed birthdays, family vacations, school plays, and quiet moments I had nearly forgotten. Talia had restored several faded pictures, enlarged others, and written the dates she could remember beneath each one. She had even made several duplicate copies so I would never have to worry about losing the originals. My vision blurred. I gently traced my fingertips across one photograph of my mother smiling at the camera, her arm wrapped around my shoulders. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Talia replied. The tears I'd been trying to hold back all evening finally escaped. Thank you. I stood and wrapped my arms around her. She hugged me tightly without saying a word. When we finally stepped apart, she cupped my face in both hands, kissed one cheek, then the other, just as she had done since I was a little boy. Her fingers drifted gently through my blonde hair, brushing it back from my forehead. We're going to get through tomorrow together, she whispered. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Then, slam. A bedroom door slammed open upstairs. Everyone in the dining room instinctively looked toward the ceiling. A few seconds later came the familiar sound of the back door opening. Then, pub 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 pub. A rapid series of gunshots echoed across the backyard. The bullets struck the outdoor target with rhythmic thuds. No one needed to ask who it was. Tate had gone back outside. Apparently, the meal hadn't done anything to cool his temper. The steady crack of gunfire continued in the distance as I stood there holding the photo album against my chest, grieving my mother while knowing my oldest, jealous, enraged buddy was trying to work through a very different kind of pain. Mark quietly excused himself from the table and stepped out the back door. The rhythmic crack of gunfire led him across the backyard. As he walked farther into the yard, his eyes drifted to the ground. Spent shotgun shells were scattered everywhere. There were so many that they blanketed the grass like autumn leaves after a storm. Thousands of empty casings glinted in the afternoon sunlight, stretching from the back porch almost all the way to the fence. It looked as though Tate had spent countless hours standing in the same spot, firing round after round. Mark's stomach sank. There stood Tate nearly 100 feet from a large target mounted against the back fence. His stance was steady, his expression cold with concentration. Pinned to the center of the target was a photograph of Mark. Each shot landed with unnerving precision, punching through the paper until Mark's face was little more than a cluster of ragged holes. Mark swallowed hard. He's been doing this for a month. Taking a cautious breath, he walked closer. Tate. No response. Mark hesitated, then gently reached out and tapped him on the shoulder. Hi, Tate. Tate slowly lowered the firearm and turned around. The instant he recognized Mark, every trace of composure vanished. His face flushed a deep, furious red. The muscles in his jaw tightened. His eyes locked onto Mark with an intensity that made Mark instinctively take half a step backward. For a long, uncomfortable moment, neither of them spoke. Mark suddenly had the unsettling feeling that Tate's attention had shifted away from the paper target. He was now staring directly at him. Mark had never seen anyone look so consumed by anger. The veins at Tate's temples stood out beneath his skin, visibly pulsing with each measured breath. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles along the sides of his face twitched. His eyes never left Mark's. For a long moment, the only sound was the breeze moving through the trees. Then Tate spoke. The words were so quiet that Mark almost didn't hear them. Get out of my sight. Tate hissed in jealousy and anger. His voice was low and strained. Before I do something I'll regret, like shooting you between your eyes. Silence. The warning was enough. Mark didn't argue, he didn't try to calm Tate down or defend himself. One look at Tate's expression told him that this wasn't the time for a conversation. Tate turned away from him and reached toward the shooting bench, refusing to make eye contact again. Mark swallowed hard. Without another word, he slowly backed away, turned, and walked toward the house. Only after he had stepped through the back door and closed it behind him did he finally let out the breath he'd been holding. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Mark felt genuinely shaken. Whatever anger Tate had been carrying for the past month clearly hadn't faded. If anything, it had only grown stronger. An hour after lunch, Noah went upstairs with Mark, each step echoing softly in the quiet house. Tate's bedroom door was shut, looming like a silent barrier. I knocked lightly. No answer. I tried again, a little harder, but the only response was the faint vibration of music pounding from inside. I reached for the knob, locked. Through the thin wood, I could hear the heavy, distorted riffs of Metallica cranked impossibly loud, the guitars and drums blaring like a warning. I pressed my ear to the door, but it didn't matter. Tate wasn't going to answer. He didn't want company, he wanted chaos. Mark gave me a faint shrug and muttered something about classic Tate, then we moved quietly down the hall. I returned to my spare room, the door clicking shut behind me. The music throbbed faintly through the walls as I climbed into bed, the familiar sheets doing little to soothe the tension coiling inside. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to drown out the sound and the unease, but Tate's presence lingered in every shadow and every wall, a silent reminder that the storm wasn't over. Around midnight, the spare door creaked open, and a tall, sexy, muscular figure filled the frame. Dark black hair, a scowling face that could have frozen the blood in anyone's veins, and a jealous gaze that cut through fire. Tate had clearly built himself physically into something else entirely, sculpted, lean, virile, dangerous, every muscle defined, and veins visible under skin that seemed almost carved. At 7% body fat, he looked like a Greek god, sex on legs, impossibly imposing and magnetic at the same time. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his shoulders and chest, turning him into a living statue of power, sexuality, and desire. Tate stepped into the room slowly, hazel eyes locking on me. Mark was asleep next to me, chest rising and falling as if oblivious to the tension he'd walked into. That sight lit a fire of jealous rage in Tate, curling in his stomach and twisting tight in his chest. He wanted to stride across the room, rip back the covers, and assert dominance to remind me that he claimed this space, that no one could take it. His fingers itched toward the gun he'd left carefully aside, a weapon that could enforce his will instantly. But the thought of Noah's distress cut through the desire to act. Shooting Mark, even to protect Tate's pride, would hurt his beloved blonde. Tate would never allow that. His jealousy collided with restraint, desire battling control, leaving a tension in his muscles sharper than the blade of a knife. He could feel every heartbeat in the room, Mark's slow, oblivious breathing, and mine, alive and aware. Every inch of him ached to mark the space as his, yet every ounce of him held back for love, because hurting me was impossible. Still, the jealousy surged relentlessly. How dare Mark sleep so close to his Noe? How dare that home wrecker exist there, occupying space Tate wanted for himself? Each breath I drew beside Mark felt like an intrusion, a violation, and a reminder of the life Tate had been denied while I laughed, traveled, and shared my space with someone else. Rage, longing, and possessiveness twisted together, burning through every fiber of his sculpted body, taut with suppressed fury. He lingered in the doorway, jaw tight, eyes narrowed, every muscle coiled like a tight bed spring. The violent potential of his anger hummed beneath his skin, restrained only by the devotion he felt for me. And yet, even in restraint, he radiated power and danger, a perfect storm of jealousy and desire, impossibly sculpted, undeniably alluring, and inevitable to ignore. Every thought, heartbeat, and shadow reminded him he would not yield, not to Mark, not to the world, not even to his own temper. Tate left my room, slamming the door behind him with barely restrained fury. His body shook with barely contained rage, muscles taut and trembling, palms twitching as if they might strike something or someone at any moment. How dare Mark sleep next to his Noe? How dare anyone invade the space that was his by right? His beloved little truck, his Noe, had dared to spend the summer away, not just anywhere, but with the man Tate hated most, Mark. The thought alone made his chest tight, heat rising behind his eyes. Every image of Noah laughing, lying next to that man, sharing space, warmth, attention. It was a provocation Tate couldn't ignore, a violation that demanded an answer his body couldn't calm. He imagined Mark's easy smile, the way he had leaned into Noah's life as if claiming it for himself, as if he could take something Tate had spent years defining as his. And in those fantasies, Tate's mind twisted further. Mark must have seduced Noah during those 4 weeks on their vacation. Poor Noe, the sweetest, most fragile thing in the world, had given in, and Mark had got what he wanted, had taken his place even for a moment in the space Tate considered sacred. Tate's fists clenched, knuckles white, as he struggled against the fire coiling in him. He wanted to roar, to storm back upstairs, to make Mark pay for daring to exist in his Noe's arms, but the thought of causing Noah distress, of breaking him or hurting him in any way, stopped him. Still, the jealousy roared inside, relentless, obsessive, and unyielding. Every step he took down the hall was measured, careful, but the storm inside him was barely contained, threatening to explode with every heartbeat, every thought of Noah and Mark together. Tate had been denied, ignored, and left behind, and the world had dared to continue as if Tate didn't exist. And yet, even in restraint, his obsession, his possessiveness, his burning need to reclaim Noah flared hotter than anything else. This wasn't just jealousy. It was claiming, it was marking what was his, and nothing, not distance, not time, not even Mark, would change that. Bang, bang, bang. I bolted upright in bed, heart hammering. 6 in the morning, and Tate was already outside, unleashing a hail of bullets into the backyard. The sharp cracks of gunfire reverberated through the walls, rattling the windows and making the floorboards vibrate beneath my bare feet. Through the chaos, I could hear Talia's frantic voice cutting over the noise from her window. Totem Joseph, Cornelius Blue, stop it right now, you're waking everyone up too early, you are not destroying everything again. But it was useless. Her words bounced off the night air, swallowed by the relentless thunder of gunshots. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the sheets, my mind racing. The smell of gunpowder somehow reached me even through the walls. Mark stirred beside me, mumbling groggily, half awake, entirely confused. I didn't have the energy to explain, I barely had the energy to breathe. Outside, the staccato rhythm of Tate's bullets echoed like a warning. It was impossible to ignore. Even in the house, even inside the walls, his presence loomed, chaotic, relentless, impossibly jealous, and utterly unrestrained. Mark laughed softly, the sound impossibly calm against the cacophony outside. "Noah," he said, nudging me lightly, "Tate wanted to wake you up as punishment for choosing me. He's trying to get your attention. He's jealous of me in your bed." I let out a long, tired sigh, rubbing my eyes. I know, I muttered, feeling the weight of the week pressing down on me. Everything, the funeral, the family chaos, the cruise, Tate's madness had piled up, and now this. I just wanted a moment of peace, a moment of normalcy, but it was impossible. My body ached with exhaustion, my mind fuzzy from sleepless nights and unrelenting stress. The gunshots didn't cease. They rattled the windows, pounded against the walls, a relentless reminder of Tate's presence and fury. Each bang vibrated through the floorboards, through the furniture, even through my bones. I stayed on the edge of the bed, gripping the sheets like a lifeline, feeling both annoyed and strangely protective of Tate. It didn't make sense, but I knew him too well. He was volatile, obsessive, jealous, but hurting me or anyone else he valued. That line he wouldn't cross. Mark rolled onto his back, letting out a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Guess we're having breakfast with gunfire as the soundtrack," he muttered, shaking his head. "Who needs peace and quiet anyway?" I closed my eyes for a moment, leaning back against the pillows, listening to the rhythm of Tate's chaos. It was maddening, exhausting, relentless, and yet familiar. The same destructive energy I'd known for years, the same obsession and need for control. My stomach twisted with nerves and anticipation. Would Tate storm in here next? Would he pause long enough to glare, to assert, or to mark his territory? The morning stretched out like this. Shot after shot, crack after gunshot, the percussion of violence threading through the air. I tried to eat, tried to sip water, tried to convince myself that this was just another morning, just another Tate performance. But my body refused to relax, my mind refused to forget. Mark kept chuckling quietly beside me, making light of it, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the flicker of unease in his eyes. 3 hours passed like this. 3 hours of relentless gunfire, intermittent shouts from Talia out her fourth-story window, trying to reason with him, my own silent prayers for calm, sanity, or for the storm to pass. By the time lunch was finally served, I was empty, frayed at the edges, and every nerve in my body was on alert. And yet, in a strange, twisted way, this chaos, the jealousy, the obsession, the relentless presence of Tate, had become part of the rhythm of life here. A rhythm I had no choice but to survive. Tate avoided me all day, moving through the house like a storm cloud I couldn't touch. I tried not to think about him, but every glance at a shadowed doorway or the echo of heavy footsteps made my chest tighten. I spent the afternoon with Talia, wandering through her greenhouse and garden, picking ripe vegetables and talking quietly to distract myself from the chaos upstairs. The sun was warm on my back, the scent of soil and herbs grounding, almost normal, almost. It felt like a tiny reprieve from the constant tension, the relentless storm that was Tate. I glanced up toward Tate's bedroom out of habit, curiosity mixing with dread. From the window, I saw his sharp profile framed in the late afternoon light. His dark hair was messy, a few strands falling across his scowl, and then, without hesitation, he flipped me off. Middle finger clear and deliberate. I froze for a second, part amused, part exasperated. Tate had never flipped me off before today. He'd do it to authority figures, family, teachers, and parents, but never to me. Before I could even react, the shutters slammed shut, cutting him out of view and leaving me staring at the closed window like a punchline in some cruel comedy. Talia glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "That's dramatic," she said lightly, a faint laugh escaping despite the tension in the air. I smirked, shaking my head. "Welcome back to the Blue Estate," I muttered, picking up another tomato, feeling both annoyed and oddly charmed by the sheer audacity of it all. I sighed, feeling the weight of the summer pressing down on me. After I had left him following Brown, how had he taken it? Talia cringed, glancing away for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "Not well, Noah, not good at all," she admitted, her voice tight with sympathy. "He felt abandoned, left out, forgotten and erased. You were gone, and he didn't know how to cope." She paused, as if gathering the courage to speak the next part. "He spent most of July in a daze of frustration and loneliness, shooting bottles in the backyard, hitting trees with his bat, banging his skull against his bedroom wall." Her words landed like heavy stones. "He missed you, Noah. He was unhappy. He pined all month for you." When he wasn't at the range or lost in his own thoughts, Tate stood by the mailbox, watching the road and waiting for your return. The days dragged on, and for an entire month he carried the weight of your absence, quietly hoping that one day you would come back. Talia shook her head slightly. Most of the time he just sat or lay on his bed crying, sometimes for hours, mostly staring at the ceiling, thinking about you. The image of him alone, consumed by obsession and grief, pressed into my chest. I felt a hollow ache, a mixture of guilt and a strange, tender longing I hadn't realized I carried. Tate's pain had been constant, silent, and entirely for me. "I should have told Tate in person," I muttered, feeling the guilt settle like a stone in my chest. "He pined for me all summer." Talia nodded, her expression heavy. Yes, Noah, every day, he waited for you in his own way even if he didn't know how to reach you. Upstairs, Tate lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, replaying memories of the last summer we'd spent together before I had stopped loving him at 18. Each recollection twisted through his mind, our laughter, our closeness, the small routines only we shared. He remembered the warmth of my presence, the way I had made him feel like he mattered.